Hello, my name is Pam Hurst Della Pietra, and I am founder and president of Children Screens Institute of Digital Media and Child Development, and host of today's special webinar on creativity. I'm delighted that you could join us. Our panelists have reviewed the questions that you submitted and will answer as many as possible during and after their presentations. If you have additional questions during the workshop, please type them into your Q&A box at the bottom of your screen and indicate whether or not you'd like to ask your question live on camera, or if time permits and it's possible, the moderator would read your question. We're recording today's workshop and hope to upload a video on YouTube in the coming days. It is now my great pleasure to introduce our moderator. Dr. Robert Bilder is the Tennenbaum Family Distinguished Professor of Psychiatry and Biobehavioral Sciences, Chief of Psychology at UCLA Semel Institute for Neuroscience and Human Behavior, Director of the Tennenbaum Center for Biology of Creativity. His team recently completed the Big C project, examining brain and behavior in exceptional artists, an exceptional scientist, and a SMART comparison group, and is now leading a National Endowment of the Arts research lab to develop a novel arts impact measurement system. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you so much, Pam. I'm really glad to be here, delighted to be part of such an amazing panel that you've assembled. To start things off, I thought it would be fun to talk a little bit about certain aspects of creativity that we've learned at the Tennenbaum Center for the Biology of Creativity over the last few years. And I hope that folks can now see my screen. Our topic for today is really how to build creativity, how to launch creative futures for our kids. The one message that I would like to get across is that it's important to find balance in all of this work. As you know, if you look into the self-help sections of any bookstore, you can find an infinite number of authoritative works that will tell you the one thing that you need to focus on in order to enhance your own creativity or that of your kids. And what I'd like to say is that I think that there is no one thing. In fact, I aim to write a book that's called The Other Thing, to highlight that what's really important is balance, the balance of flexibility and stability, the balance of action and rest. And these are the kinds of mechanisms that occur within the individual human brain, and that I think that we can promote to enhance creative potentials and that flow state that I think is such a desideratum of our work. Now, of course, to persuade you that any of these ideas are true, I need to show you colorful images of the brain, because we know that colorful images of the brain are what persuades us that data are actually accurate. These are images that we constructed from looking at what the word creativity does when it is intersected against the entire world literature, looking at all the neuroimaging studies that have ever been done. And fortunately, we have some great people here today to talk about various brain processes and other kinds of processes that are important in creativity. But I want to tell you just a little bit about some of the studies we've done that have looked particularly at functional creativity. Now, this is an example from a colleague, Roger Beatty, and his friends, who looked at certain patterns of creativity as people were performing cognitive tasks. And one of the interesting things that they found is that, well, usually when we get engaged in tasks, certain parts of our brains turn on and other parts turn off. That in the creative brain, there's a tendency for these different functional systems in the brain to work together and to be turned on simultaneously rather than at alternating times. And that's the kind of a pattern when we look at networks in the brain that deviates from a uniform or regular pattern. Some people have talked about the small world pattern of brain networks that highlights how we can make a more efficient brain by connecting certain things together. But interestingly, when we've looked at Big C individuals, we were able to mount a study with support from the John Templeton Foundation to look at exceptional visual artists, exceptional scientists, and compare those folks to what we call a smart control group, who were matched on intelligence and education, but that did not possess these amazing creative achievements. And what we found is that they showed a more random pattern of connection in their brains. Indeed, that whether they were at rest or performing certain cognitive tasks, that they tended to explore different kinds of random connections in their brain relative to other comparison participants. So this is basically a pattern that is less efficient. They showed lower amounts of small worldness, but more randomness. And this was found particularly in big C creative scientists and also in exceptional visual artists. Now, one way to think about that, since many of you may not be specialists in network topologies and stuff like that, but if you've flown on an airplane, you've seen, the transportation maps and the maps of airline clusters, and you can see from these that there are certain places that are connected very strongly to others. Those are the hubs of transportation, while others are more remotely connected. And this is a more efficient pattern of organization that enables us to actually get in airplanes and fly around and get from point A to point B most efficiently. But what we are finding in some of our exceptionally creative individuals is that they are more likely to have random flights going from, say, Duluth to Burbank, where you don't have to go to other big hubs at LAX in order to get from point A to point B. The exceptionally creative individuals are exploring these alternate ways to get from one place to another in the brain in a way that is not necessarily the most efficient way to think, but is exploring connections that others would not explore. So now there's something else that I think is pertinent to today's series of talks, and that is what happens to our brains when we are subjected to an environment that is restricted and is focusing more and more of our attention, for example, onto Zoom screens, where we have to look at a very small segment of our entire world. And there's a long-standing literature that looks at the broadening and narrowing of attention. And I think the idea that I was mentioning at the very beginning about balance is critical here. The key to creativity from the work that I've seen and that we have done is that one needs to have a balance of broadening and narrowing of attention working together in order to promote creative achievement. What we see, though, as we have all been trapped in the Zoomosphere and are spending all of our attention online, is a narrowing of attention, which goes along with anxiety. And I think that what we critically need at times like those we're confronting now is ways to broaden our attention, to liberate ourselves from the constriction of attention that leads us to overfocus. And the more time we can spend in open monitoring and to promote that aspect of our worlds and our lives, and to do so for our children, is probably one of the greatest things that we can do to promote their creativity. So in the most scientific study yet, I asked my two children, I have twins who are now 18 years old, but here they were when they were about 7, and I asked them what promotes creativity, and they described the things that made a difference to them. And those included intensive engagement. And I think that every bit of research that we've identified shows that motivation to be engaged and to stay engaged is critical to creative achievement. But even more important than that in some ways is the freedom to explore alternatives. I think that to identify problems that don't have correct answers, where there's no right or wrong, that those are critical components of creativity that we can support for our kids. And then finally, I think that one of the amazing elements that helps to support creativity are not only connections in our brains, but connections to others, connections to other kids, connections to other people in our environment, that interaction among people. And like the prairie voles that are behind me showing side-by-side behavior and caring for their pups, it's that kind of connection, connectedness, and attachment that helps to support creative achievement. So with that, let me just thank you for paying attention, and thank those who have sponsored our research. And let us move on to the rest of our program, which I think is a very exciting one. That I think will begin with a vignette. One of the things that will be an exciting distinction about this particular conference is that throughout the course of the day, not only will you be hearing from fantastic speakers, but you'll additionally be getting special vignettes from students, art teachers, musicians, and young creatives that will further enhance the process. So with that, what I'd like to do is let us turn to a project segment where we can see Audrey and her creative team video.
I am a freshman at MIT, but currently I am stuck home in California. So Think is a high school research program where high school students can submit a proposal detailing their ideas for a research project, and finalists receive funding and mentorship from MIT students and faculty to make their ideas a reality. So I was a finalist in 2019, my junior year of high school, and now I'm on the committee that runs the program. So things have come full circle for me. So what motivates me to be creative? Well, the two things that I enjoy learning about and exploring the most are computer science and art. When I'm not coding, most likely I am painting. So what I love most about art is the sheer freedom it gives me. So it enables me to bring flying cats to life, and it also gives me the voice to express who I am and how I see the world. And I kind of see computer science in a similar way. Computer science also lets me bring my ideas to life and create what hasn't existed before, like an AI art critic. And applications for the 2021 Think program are now open. It was one of the most meaningful experiences I've had in high school, and you can apply at think.mit.edu.
Well, that is amazing. Thank you, Audrey. And I hope that everyone will be looking up those applications and submitting things to the Think program. Next, I am very honored to be able to introduce an amazing researcher about creativity, someone who knows more about the brain and creativity than about anyone, Darya Zabelina, who is an assistant professor of psychology at the University of Arkansas. Dr. Zabelina's work focuses on understanding creative cognition, imagination, and other related processes, and how these processes are linked with more traditional subfields of cognitive psychology, such as attention and executive functions. Darya, take it away.
Thank you very much, Bob. Thanks for having me. So I would like to share with you today just a bird's eye view of the neuroscience of creativity. First, our brain is sort of structured in a way that there are several different networks, right? That several different regions of the brain that activate when we're involved in some kind of, some type of thinking or cognitive process. And as Dr. Bilder mentioned before, there are two brain networks that seem to co-activate when people are thinking creatively. And that's really interesting because previously they thought or for most types of cognition, they do not work together. But for creative thinking specifically, they seem to come online at the same time, which is really, really amazing. So that's the cognitive control network or the frontoparietal control network. That's another name for it. And typically that network is, these brain regions are involved in error monitoring, initiation of tasks, core networks for task control, things like that. And then the default mode network is generally activated for internally directed attention, self-generated cognition. And again, for creativity, these two types of network, these regions appear to both be really important. So that's in terms of sort of where creativity happens in the brain. Now let's briefly talk about what type of activity is important for creative thinking. There's many studies at this point that show that alpha band activity, some of you have probably heard of alpha activity in the brain. So that's activity that happens between 8 to 13 hertz. So it's the frequency of neuron oscillations in our brain. And this type of activity is generally present when we have our eyes closed, when we're relaxed, when we're when our attention is directed internally. And it appears that specifically this type of activity is becomes more prevalent when people are thinking about sort of these uncommon thoughts compared to more normal kind of standard thoughts. So that's really interesting too. And also some of our work, and also, as Bob mentioned, there's a lot of work from previous literature that also shows that creative people generally, more creative people have what we call leaky attention. We define that sort of as where their attentional filters are not very precise. So not is it only just broad attention, but we have seen that with P50RP, that's event-related potential, where more creative people, their sensory filters, even their sensory perception is not very precise. They let in more sensory information. They notice more things in the real world that other people might not notice. And as you can imagine, that probably serves as a double-edged sword that some people with this type of attention might have difficulties with attentional focus. Might lead to increased mind wandering or attention disorders. But on the other hand, it might also help these people to introduce unusual or original pieces of information into their cognition, so sort of making them more creative. And sort of tying all of this information into the topic of today's webinar, media and creativity, this is probably a very common scene that that we're all now familiar with, where kids go to the playground to all stare at their phone, maybe even talk to each other by texting. And this type of external attention, by definition, might lead to fewer engagement or lesser engagement of that default mode network, less alpha band activity that is so important for creativity. And of course, the balance is important, but external attention to a device all the time does not allow kids to sort of think, to direct their attention inwards. And I just wanted to briefly mention a study that shows that not only does media and cell phones might affect default mode network, but it also appears that they might also have an effect on our cognitive control as well. So we had a study where we had participants perform a cognitive control task, and we measured their brain activity and let them listen to either smartphone sounds or cognitive control sounds. So they were just kind of randomly appearing before each trial on this cognitive control task. And what we found was that participants, when they heard smartphone sounds, they were slower on the consequent trials. And they also showed smaller overall N2 ERP, which is a marker of cognitive control, suggesting that right after participants heard the smartphone sounds, there was a brief reduction in cognitive control, right? So they were slower and there was a brief reduction in cognitive control. So it appears that media might affect both default mode and cognitive control networks. So very briefly, what can we do about it? Other speakers will talk about this in more detail today, but time and nature, unstructured play, role playing. I have some potential slides here. So time and nature, unstructured play, there's a really good podcast on this. Role playing, reading, of course, and mindfulness appears to actually facilitate creative thinking. So thank you very much. Thanks to my lab, sources of funding. And I have quite a few resources that will be shared with you later, books and webinars and other videos. Thanks very much.
That is fantastic. Darya, thank you so much. I've learned a lot during your presentation. I'm sure our audience has as well. One of the things I wanted to bring us to, in addition to these amazing resources, some of the tips that you provided, I'm wondering, how do we apply them to the very young, to young kids and infants? Older kids can engage in a number of these kinds of activities, but what do we do with our real little ones? What are your thoughts about that?
That's a really good question. So, creativity, some people, when you bring up the word creativity, they think of the arts right away, right? So you think, well, with older kids, we can give them things to draw in art classes. However, the way that I think about creativity is just a way of thinking, right? So it's encouraging even younger kids to to explore. So rather than giving them things to do all the time, trying to engage them, trying to sort of occupy them every single second, I think it's really important to, and research shows that it's important to actually let them be bored sometimes, let them find a way to engage that default mode network, let them engage in mind wandering. So that's, even for infants, instead of sort of trying to occupy them every single moment, let them be bored, let them explore.
Really? You mean we don't need to plug them into baby Einstein videos 100% of the time?
That's okay too sometimes, right? So that's actually, I wanted to make a point that I don't think we need to say that media and cell phones and everything is bad, right? So they definitely serve a function. We can connect with the loved ones and learn, but no, we don't need to plug them in front of the TV all the time.
Yeah, I have one more quick question, which may deserve more than a quick answer, but we'll have time for a quick answer. And that is, what do you see in the EEG patterns of creative people, or when people are performing creative tasks? What kind of patterns do you observe?
Yes, right. So as I mentioned, I think alpha activity is the most frequent brain or the oscillations that seem to be really important for creativity, and that's the oscillations that come aligned when we are internally focused, when we are bored, when we are on a bus looking outside and sort of mind wandering thing, so that's we can actually see. And of course that brain activity is not only specific to creative thinking. There's no such region, there's no such specific type of activity or region in the brain that's a creativity region. And no, the right brain is not more creative than the left one. But we can definitely see markers of creative thinking, and also just markers of creative people. Creative people just in general, there's some research showing that creative people just tend to have more alpha activity in the brain than less creative people.
Really fantastic, really fantastic. So that seems to be compatible with the idea that relaxing some of the constraints on our cognition, that this opportunity to decrease the level of intensive cognitive control may be valuable to creative thought.
Yeah,
is that?
Exactly. Yes.
All right. Well, that is amazing. Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Darya. I look forward to hearing more of your exciting work as we move along. I think that what we have coming up now is another project segment where Brooke is going to give us another example of a creative team.
Hi, my name is Brooke Nuesfsky, and I'm a junior from New York. I've always been really passionate about STEM because I believe it really just provides people with an amazing opportunity to find an intersection between technical scientific thinking and creativity. So I've always just really want to pursue this path. And I really just in general am so interested in using creative expression in all that I do, because I believe that creativity is really just the catalyst for progress in society. And I think that it's so important that people understand the value of creativity, because I feel like sometimes within school systems, creativity is not always easy to express or easy to value. So I think that's so important that people take the time on their own to really just nurture their abilities so that they can use their creative abilities to really just make an impact on the world.
Well, that was an incredible presentation. There's a little lag there, but it's very exciting to hear from our teens how they're going about doing creativity in the real world. But next up, I'm excited to introduce Natalie Evans. Natalie is a doctoral candidate in developmental psychology at Temple University, one of the meccas of creativity research, and she's working there with Kathy Hirsch-Pasek. Natalie's research focuses on fostering curiosity, exploration, and creativity during playful learning, which is perfect for today's topics. So Natalie, take it away.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here with everyone today to speak a bit about how we can understand creativity and foster creativity in young preschool children. So I thought I'd start off by thinking about what is creativity. I think what comes to a lot of people's mind at first is this aha light bulb moment where you suddenly come up with this brilliant idea. But we know that there's more to it than that. So something we look at quite often in creativity research is divergent thinking. So this process of idea generation, coming up with lots of different ideas in response to a prompt or problem. And this is actually the most common way that creativity is measured in both children and adults through tasks such as the alternative uses tasks, where, for instance, a child might be asked, what are all the ways you can think of that you could use a newspaper? But you also might be thinking that just coming up with ideas in itself isn't enough to be creative. You need to then combine that divergent thinking with convergent thinking, which is honing in and trying out one of the ideas that you came up with. Okay. And another thing you might be thinking is, how do we get to that stage of idea generation in the first place? And what I would suggest, and other researchers would suggest, is that first we need to engage in curiosity, asking questions about the world around us that then sparks exploration, where you get to explore your surroundings and start to generate those ideas. So when I was trying to come up with the tasks to understand and measure creativity in young preschool children, I wanted to address those issues I just brought up. I wanted to move beyond just simple idea generation to a task that would allow kids to try out ideas or converge on one idea. And I wanted exploration to be a vital part of that task. And that is how I came up with this through looking at other research. I came to this ball and jar task. So when I give this task to kids, I put a tall jar in front of them with a ball in it and ask them to try and figure out how to get the ball out without sticking your hand in or without tipping the jar over. And I give them a variety of everyday objects to help them do this. So for instance, they get pipe cleaners, spoons, sticky clay, things like that. And what we're looking at, what this allows us to do is look at not only can kids get the ball out, which, to be honest, this is a pretty hard task for preschoolers to do, but perhaps more interestingly, how do kids try to go about getting the ball out? And what we did is we measured the sorts of behaviors kids engaged in while they were participating in this task. In particular, we looked at exploration behaviors. So these were behaviors where kids would physically manipulate the properties of an object, such as bending the pipe cleaner or mashing up this sticky clay. And what we found was that kids who engaged in more exploration behaviors were more likely to be successful on this task than those that did not. So this moves on to a bigger point of how do we then foster creativity in kids? And on the flip side of that, I think it's also helpful to think about how do we kill creativity in kids? And I think one way that can happen is when we discourage exploration by saying that there is only one right answer to a problem someone is faced with. So Liz Bonowitz did some interesting work on this topic with young children in looking at exploration and what might hinder it. So she gave children this exciting novel toy you see here that has several different functions, such as switches that turn on lights, music, hidden squeakers, trapdoors, things like that. And she presented this to kids in a few different ways. So some kids received some direct instructions. So they were shown this toy and a button on the toy, and they were told, push this button by the adult that was showing them the toy. Other kids were given a question such as, I wonder what this button can do. And kids were, after being given those directions or instructions, were then given the chance to play with the toy on their own. And what the researchers found was that those kids who were given direct instruction, that very directive prompt of how to play with the toy, they chose to play with that toy for less time. And they also discovered fewer functions on that toy compared to kids who had been given questions instead. So to wrap it up with some takeaways of how we can encourage creativity through play, we're looking for exploration and play that embodies certain qualities. First of all, it has to be joyful. Kids have to be having fun in the process of exploring and playing. It should be interactive. So this can be peer-to-peer interaction between kids, or it can be an adult providing a supporting role for kids in a creative activity or endeavor they are trying to do. It should be meaningful. So it should be child-led. The child's interest should come first. when it comes to exploration so that they stay engaged. So that is willingness to be minds-on and engaged without distractions. Next, it should be active. So kids shouldn't be sitting back and taking a passive role. They should be hands-on. And one way we know we can really encourage that is by asking questions of children and also encouraging children to ask questions themselves. And finally, including an iterative nature. So what we mean by that is when kids have the option to try and fail things, retest things and try again. That is an important part of exploration leading to creativity. So thank you very much. And I will leave it here with just a recap of what the key behaviors we're looking for to cultivate creativity through play.
That is really fantastic. Thank you so much, Natalie. That was really wonderful. You know, among the questions we have coming in, I'm wondering what can we do following the kinds of tips that you've provided, especially with kids who may have intellectual disabilities? What are the kinds of activities we might be able to do to engage with them?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I think it all comes back to what I was saying before with taking the child's interest first. You know, I think with the work of preschoolers, we hear that creativity is this lofty thing that you have to come up with something that is novel and useful. But really, I think creativity is something that is accessible to everyone. And I think with young kids and perhaps kids with intellectual disabilities, I think to go off something Darya was saying before, it's, you know, creativity is a way of thinking. And I think it starts with finding out what is the child's interests and following up there. And I also want to, you know, say something about the role of adults there. You know, when I was explaining direct instruction before, we don't want adult involvement that is too heavy-handed, that is telling the child what to do, leading along the way. But adults can be there in a supporting role. So if a child displays interest in a topic, you know, asking questions or trying to get that child to elicit questions might be those first steps to bringing out creativity in young kids.
Right, well, that's wonderful. And I'm wondering also, as we move to you know, again, these older folks, older learners, people, you know, who may be in advanced education, higher education, graduate students, you commented on joyfulness. It seems like sometimes in graduate education, the joy is not always obvious. How do we spark joy and that excitement for learning as we go through life?
Yeah, that is an excellent question and very prescient as a graduate student myself at the moment. I think it keeps coming back to, you know, grounding what we do in what that spark of curiosity was, what led us to these questions or these routes of education that we pursued from the beginning. You know, what questions were we answering? We're trying to answer. What led us to want to explore more? I think that is the place to start.
Mm-hmm. That's really brilliant. I love that idea. Maybe you can have another seminar for your fellow graduate students as a, you know, a follow-on project from your dissertation. Well, that's fantastic. Let us move along to another project segment that we have from Brandon, another creative team.
Hey guys, my name is Brandon Niederauer. I'm a 17-year-old musician and actor from Long Island, New York, and I'm so happy to be here for this amazing webinar for children and screens. We're going to be talking about creativity today. Creativity is something I hold very close to my heart. I try to be creative every single day, and I'm so happy that my parents got me involved. You know, they bought me my first guitar at age 8. I've been playing for 10 years now, and that went into so many things in my career involving, you know, acting and singing, you know, all stem from the guitar. The arts are so subjective, you know, it's all about you and it's all about finding yourself in it and getting lost in it. And that's something that I feel like all kids and everyone in the world should be able to experience, you know, just getting lost in music or getting lost in art or anything, you know, anything creative. I feel like it's the parents' job to really, you know, immerse themselves in their child's environment and try to, you know, support them in their quest to find creativity in their own lives. So, I'm going to play a little piece for you. I'm just going to make something up to be creative, you know, be spontaneous, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. yeah, in that moment, when I'm playing guitar, I'm making all those stank faces. There's just something about it that, nothing can beat it. And I hope all kids and all parents get to see that. And yeah, thank you guys so much. And I hope you guys enjoy the rest of the webinar. Peace.
Well, that is indeed incredible. Brandon is such an inspiration, I've got to say. And, in honor of Brandon, I have to change my virtual background to something that's a little bit more musical. And yeah, here we go. This is a place that we found long ago. Wait a minute. Forget about that. We're just going to go to the brain background for the time being. While we search for the other musical performance territory. Oh boy, well, there we go. Thanks, anyhow. Anyhow, Brandon is truly inspiring. I love the way he described getting lost in the music, just as I've gotten lost in the midst of my virtual backgrounds. But what we'd like to do is move on to present you another vignette from Dana, a creative teen. And I think that'll further get us the message about creativity in teens.
I'm Dana Koops. I'm 18 years old. I'm an actress, screenwriter, and director, and a first-year student at Paris College of Art and at Emerson. I'm studying film. For me, creativity means being innovative, inventive, imaginative. It means having an open mind and being brave. It means thinking outside of the box, and I think to some degree it means being human. I think that we all have a part of us that are creative, whether we are artists or mathematicians. It's in every aspect of life. When it comes to how kids can be creative, the key is just giving them the freedom to be so. As I mentioned, I think that we're all innately creative, and kids are especially so because they haven't learned to doubt themselves yet. As we get older, we learn to be less self-confident and to question our work. As a result, we tend to box ourselves in. And kids haven't learned to do that yet. So they might not have the technical knowledge of whatever that subject is that they're interested in, but they have that just raw, unfiltered creativity that is so great and so powerful. And if you really nurture that and encourage them in that, they will take that and run with it and carry that with them the rest of their lives. Merci et bonsoir.
Oh, that is fantastic. What a beautiful, beautiful message. Next, I'm really excited to introduce another one of our distinguished speakers, and that is Zorana Ivcevic Pringle. Dr. Zorana Ivcevic, excuse me, Zorana, I'm stumbling terribly on your name. Ivcevic, yes? Okay. Dr. Pringle is a senior research scientist at the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. Dr. Ivcevic studies the role of emotion and emotion skills in creativity. Zorana, thank you so much.
Thank you, Bob. I'm gonna share my screen. There we go. Thank you for the introduction, and I am very glad to be here. It is an honor to be with you. I want to talk to you today about the emotion side of creativity. And specifically, I want to talk about why does it matter? What is involved in creativity and how the creative process works, particularly from this emotion side. So the question, why? The World Economic Forum has done a survey to identify top skills for the economy of the future, and at least 3 out of 10 are related to creativity. And here I'm going to argue that another one, emotional intelligence, is crucial to make creativity happen in real life. But there's another reason too. And when we studied what kinds of tasks are perceived by high school students as creative challenges, they have primarily told us, and overwhelmingly told us, about experiences with art and music. And certainly art and music are creative, but in other words, they did not see creativity as coming into play in other areas of their endeavor and other areas, other subjects. But that really brings us to the first creativity tip. we have to uncover creativity in everyday tasks. People are creative when they think creativity is called for. We see this obviously and clearly in creativity testing, when it makes a difference if we just tell people that they should be creative. We see it in work and in school. To make children more creative, mention something as requiring creativity. It's that simple. It can be saying to a kid, let's create something, or let's be creative about that. It changes their perspective from looking for a correct answer to looking for possibilities. So our next big question is what? What is involved in creativity? And the best answer, I think, was given by Matisse, the great 20th century artist, who said creativity takes courage. What does that exactly look like? We did study with high school students, and we looked at how they think about creativity, and we found different apprehensions they have. One is this concern about negative social consequences of creativity. People might think that original ideas are silly, and consequently, they have this attitude that it's better to be safe than original. But the third way is thinking that creative projects really feel deeply important. So what do we do with this? Well, it is not possible to erase those apprehensions, but it's possible to make them clear and obvious. So I have a 10-year-old son, and recently they had an invention project at school. I discovered that he was really apprehensive about what teacher is going to say to different ideas, and his plan was to stick to examples that the teacher has mentioned. But once we uncovered this apprehension, he dared to venture beyond, and he has transformed an imaginative game he's playing with his best friend into a board game that he's going to fully develop and market to a local store. So our next step is identify sources of apprehension and help kids manage their emotion. So how do we do this, right? It's easy to say, but what's the process? Is it about grit? And you might have heard of the concept of grit. It includes consistency of interest and perseverance on the way to goals. And it's very useful if you want to perform well on a spelling bee. It is very well defined what you have to do well on the task, and you have to stick with exactly defined set of steps. However, it doesn't work like that with creativity. Creative individuals have broad interests. They draw from these different interests, and this is not going to help. But what is going to help is passion, is having goals, defining one's identity in terms of activities. So you are not just writing poetry, you are a poet or an artist. Intent to engage in an activity and the desire, a burning desire to do something. So what do we do with this? Brings us to the third creativity tip. Start with existing interests, but also allow for interests to change. Interests are going to be different at different ages. So for a 3-year-old, use those Amazon boxes you have lying in your basement. They might go to the moon, or they might create trains. And for an older child, it's going to look different. My child is interested in archaeology. He's reading the Smithsonian magazine. So on a walk in nature, we have invented an elaborate story of investigating and digging for a lost civilization. And creativity takes self-regulation. It starts with some skills of thinking, but then we are facing a blank, undefined task. We have to think of multiple ideas, choose ideas, and also jump over hurdles. Throughout this process, there are emotions, and we can use those emotions. We can use emotions of interest and joy and enjoying something that we are interested in, but also we can use frustration. lot of inventors, lot of entrepreneurs are moved by frustration of how something doesn't work right in the world, and they want to make it better. And throughout this process, we manage the emotions in order to reach an end product or an end goal. This managing emotions is crucially important. Once we have this impetus for creativity and interest in creativity, managing emotions is going to help us stick with it, manage their passion, maintain the passion, and then finally have something that we end up with. So my third tip for you is that self-regulation is going to be crucial in transforming ideas into action. And to do that, we have to know what to expect. We are going to find a range of emotions. Joy is very important, and it's going to be important for coming up with ideas, but there will be obstacles and there will be frustrations and there will be revisions to an original idea. And we have to provide space for autonomy, time for exploration, and for making mistakes. And there I would like to end, thank all those who made this possible, and leave you with Calvin and Hobbes and a way of perhaps not doing creativity. I will stop my share now and get back to Bob.
That's fantastic, Zorana. Thank you so much. I'm really inspired. And yeah, and your final cartoon, indicating that panic can sometimes arise when we're confronting some of the emotions that need to be grappled with. I think that's a really unique feature of your presentation, is how managing emotions, regulating emotions can be a key to creativity. And I'm wondering, what kinds of advice you can give us about how to promote kids' capacity to tolerate ambiguity, to stick with a problem for longer. I know that's one of the correlates of high levels of creative achievement, is the ability to stick with a problem longer, to resist premature closure. Yet this frustration is something we all confront. So I wonder what we as parents can do to help manage that for our kids and help them bridge that gap.
That is a great question. And what oftentimes happens is that because of those uncertainties which are uncomfortable, people don't even venture, do not even dare to embark on the creative process. So being able to deal with the uncertainty is the first step of making that jump. I think the crucial thing with kids is to model this process and make it clear to them that creativity is oftentimes fun, but it's not all the time fun, that it is not a problem with them and how they are doing it if they are encountering difficulties. It is really inherent in the creative process. There will be difficulties and there will be frustrations. What we can do is show them how to deal with them and show them in what we do. For instance, my child is sometimes frustrated with the process of having to revise his writing, his creative writing at school. And he's very imaginative. It is not a problem to come up with ideas, but to end with the sophisticated product is more of a challenge. And both my husband and I are scientists, and we write research papers, and he's very interested in science. So you use that interest to get in and to sustain the attention. And we share with him how many revisions we go through in writing one scientific paper. And I open my folder for my latest paper for him and show him track changes, how everything ends up getting changed. And he can see the relation to changes that have to be made in his creative writing.
Well, that's beautiful. I love the way you're able to bridge the identification and the connection to yourself and your work with your kids. I think that's a beautiful way to show them what's involved. Although I heard from others, Zorana, that your first drafts are perfect every time. I heard that you didn't require any revisions in your work.
No, no, of course not.
It's really fantastic. It's really great. Well, thank you so much. Those are fantastic tips and really great advice. At this point, what we'd like to do is move along to another vignette that we have from Joanna, who will express creativity in her way.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Joanna Kaczorowska. I'm the Director of Undergraduate Performance Studies at Stony Brook University on Long Island. Today, I will be talking about the importance of music, listening to music, and playing music in inspiring creativity in our children. So playing an instrument engages both left and right brains. So mathematical brain and creative brain are collaborating all at once. And so playing music increases volume and activity in the bridge connecting both our left and right hemisphere, which is called with a fancy name, corpus callosum. Therefore, I would love to encourage you to engage your children in a lot of musical activities. Play a piece of music for them and have them talk about how they feel, what kind of mood they feel. Maybe the music makes them feel happy. Maybe the music makes them feel sad. Create a little dance. Imitate the mood. Start laughing if the music is funny, or pretend that you are sad if the music is sad. For example, if you hear music from Vivaldi again. That's a different music. That's no longer happy music. In Antonio Vivaldi, this is thunderstorm with lots of lightning and lots of rain. But maybe your child imagines something different. Maybe he or she say, well, it's a scary magician just doing some crazy magic spell and throwing it on, I don't know, bunch of fairies. Who knows what they're gonna create? For example, then, after the storm in Vivaldi, come back to the different mood. What painting will they make for that particular music? Vivaldi changes the mood. In second movement, he goes like this. Very different. Suddenly, mood is very relaxed, maybe sleepy. In Antonio Vivaldi, shepherds and their sheep are sleeping in the meadows covered in flowers. But there's Vivaldi. Your child will certainly have a different idea. Music is the most incredible way to engage your child's brain and create wonderful thinkers, little thinkers who are terrific in math, in linguistics, and creativity. Go ahead, engage their musical spirit and their musical brain, have them listen to the music, spend time with them listening to the music and discussing music, and the best of all, sign them up for music lessons. Good luck.
Well, that is really spectacular. And I was able to find my musical background, the Knitting Factory, an old jazz club in New York City. And I love the way Joanna has identified engagement in music as a way to promote creative engagement. And I think that it harkens back to a number of the presentations which have really highlighted how there's no right answer to what Vivaldi is expressing in their music. And I think throughout musical expression, it's open to interpretation. And I think that's a beautiful thing, that we can engage in our kids, not to impose upon them any preconceived notions about what that music represents. And then as children get to be involved in producing music, I think that offers even greater opportunities for expression of emotion, and a channel that is really remarkable. Look at what Brandon was able to bring to the table in that respect. Anyhow, very inspiring work. And to continue us on the path of inspiration, I'm delighted to be able to introduce our next speaker, Charlotte Resnick. Charlotte Resnick is a child educational psychologist, a former UCLA Associate Clinical Professor of Psychology, go Bruins, and is foremost authority on how to engage with and develop mindfulness, meditation, and imagination in children, teens, and young adults. She's the author of The Power of Your Child's Imagination: How to Transform Stress and Anxiety into Joy and Success. Dr. Resnick.
Oh, Bob, I'm so happy to be here. And I'm in the trenches with kids. So as a child and teen psychotherapist, I try to help them engage their imagination to solve their everyday problems. And I try to have fun with them, because why not? We know that in creativity, it's important to have fun, and that's what we do. So I thought I'd share with you just a few tools that you could do with your kids with things that come up. And the only thing that changes in ages, like I'm going to be sharing a little bit of a story about an 8-year-old girl I've been working with, is that if you work with an older or younger, you just change the language that works for them. So for instance, maybe, thank you for showing the next slide. The first thing that's really important is to connect within. I always tell kids, I don't have their answers, but I'm there to help them find their own answers. And so the first step is that they have wisdom within. We have to center and get connected. And I find this is a perfect balance from all the screens that kids are on. So here we have this is what I call the balloon breath. I like it because it's an easy visual, but for teenagers, you might just call it deep breathing. And in fact, as you're listening, you might just put your hand on your belly, below your belly button. And the idea is, when you breathe in, the balloon gets bigger. And when you breathe out, it flattens. And this kind of breath centers you. And you might do it just to a count of 3. And the idea is, when you go inside, and the next step is to find a safe place. So thanks for the next slide. Because this is, thank you. This is one of this lovely, adorable girl's special places. And you can see it's, typical, beautiful. There's a rainbow in there. And in her special place is a place that she could relax and take a little mini vacation from life's troubles, but she also can do her inner work in a fun way. So we invite, with kids, I like to invite maybe protective animal friends and maybe wizards if they're into Harry Potter. She happens to have a fairy. Here she has Sparkles the unicorn and Mochi the mouse, and her rainbow fairy is Alexandra. And they're to help her solve her problems. And it's kind of a fun way to kind of trick their emotions, trick their logical thinking to get to a more creative spot, to get to their wisdom, which I really believe they have. So if you look at the next slide, this little girl that I'm working with has a lot of trouble with anger and big feelings, and maybe melts down. And her goal, not my goal, not her parents' goal, well, it is kind of our goal, but her goal that she states is, I want to control my mad feelings and be in charge of my sad feelings. So Sparkles, so what we do is have her close her eyes to connect and ask for someone to show up. So Sparkles shows up and offers her a gift to help her. And what Sparkles offered was this cake of self-control. And she was very creative and made the cake, and you could see it's 3-dimensional because she made a stand for it. And the instructions were to take 2 bites a day when you wake up and in the afternoon, and that's going to help you keep self-control. And that really works for her. And then maybe show the next slide. And the idea is you have to have a whole bag of tricks for yourself. A whole, many animal friends might come and many special places might come. And whatever the kids create or imagine, I accept. It's great. So here she has another animal friend called Kanga Cat, because it's a combination of a kangaroo and a cat. And this little girl says she gives wisdom. And what does Kanga Cat suggest? She suggests you could take deep breaths and wash away your feeling sad. So the idea that this little girl can be active in her own healing with a fun thing to do, it just works for her really well, and works for so many kids I've worked with over the years. And so if we look at even the next slide, this is another one of her special animal friends. He's a chubby teddy. He must be a COVID, teddy, because he got chubby over COVID. And he helps her with having happy dreams because she has some, scary bad dreams. And because she believes it, even if we call it the placebo effect, which I think is about 30% effective, that's fine. One little girl had a dragon wrapped around her bed to keep her face when she was sleeping, and she told her friend about it. She was a little bit older, and her friend said, what are you doing? It's just your imagination. And she said, my fears come from my imagination, so I had to go into that realm and fix it. So, just stories like that kids really take to heart their imagination and how it could help them. And let me share, not only does she have chubby Teddy, if you look at the next slide, she has a whole slew of teddies that help her. And you could see one has a heart in the center, that's to help her feel more loving, and one has a star like a sun, and that's to help her feel brighter and staying calm. And the other one helps her stay calm. So it's great to have a whole slew of animal friends, and some kids have many and some kids just have one. That's fine. That's just fine. We just want to work with wherever your child is at. And then here's on the next slide, you could see this butterfly, which we think of sometimes as an animal of transformation. And she said her butterfly brings her notes of encouragement. Like nothing bad's going to happen because there's always someone for support, which I thought was really sweet. So within these few slides, and you can go to the next slide now, the last one, which shows you how you could find me or track me down. But within these few slides, you could see how one child's imagination could be ignited to help her solve her just life problems. So you could definitely do that with your kids. With just listening to these few minutes, you have like five tools, 5 imagination tools. You have the balloon breath, you have a special place to go to that's safe, you have wisdom inside through animal friends and wizards, and you have gifts that they give you. So I hope that's helpful. You could just take it away.
It's so wonderful. Thank you so much, Charlotte. And I decided to bring one of my animal friends to try to feel a little bit better. And you have so many wonderful pieces of advice. And one of the things that really strikes me that we don't often hear much about is the importance of breathing. And I wonder if you can tell us a little bit more about the connection and to our own internal states in our bodies, and how you see that as playing a role in managing anxiety, managing fear, and managing negative emotions in general. It seems like that's an important message for people to get.
It's so important. I'm so glad you brought that up, because we take it for granted. Well, we all breathe, but there are different kinds of breathing that changes how we feel. For example, what I'm calling the balloon breath, breathing 2 inches, say, below your belly button, really centers and calms you. And when kids are upset, they often, or when anyone is angry or upset, they often breathe up in their chest and give short breaths, which is not really helpful. It just makes them all upset again more. So if you breathe down below your belly button, which in Eastern thought is your tantine, it centers and calms you. It helps reduce your blood pressure. It's just a really nice kind of breathing. And kids like it because it's, you know, a fun way of saying it. There are all kinds of breaths that you could do with kids. Some people like to do the finger breath where you follow your finger. And it's nice to change it around to make it more interesting for them. But the breath is critical. And what I usually do is I use these little round stickers that you get at Staples. And I ask kids to put up a sticker somewhere that they see a lot. It could be on their mother's forehead, but no, not really, like on the fridge or their desk or somewhere they see a lot. So when they see that sticker, they take 3 slow breaths. And then when they don't notice it anymore, you know, they habituate, they just change the color and they start doing that again. And then I have them just do a minute of breathing, and I'll time them and count their breaths by looking at their belly. And so some kids might go between 7 and 10 breaths. And I have them find a minute in their day that they could practice that kind of slow breathing just to recenter themselves. So it starts to make a big change. If they could set their little iWatch or Apple Watch every hour and do 10 breaths, do a minute of breathing, that starts to change their life a bit. Yeah, and then we work our way up. 5 breaths more, 2 weeks later, you know, I slowly move it in.
Yeah, I was just thinking that in terms of moving things up, I know that you're an expert in how to incorporate meditation practices for young adults, teens, and kids. And I just wonder, is this a path to embarking on a lifelong practice of meditation? Is that the way you see it? Or?
Oh my God, Bob, you were reading my mind. Yes, absolutely. In fact, that's why I do it slowly. And depending on if, you know, mindfulness is very popular now. And I think part of what the world has embraced is the word mind is in it, but the word meditation is not. But we know mindfulness is a form of meditation. And I've been meditating over 35 years. So started very young. And so I try to slip it in. Some kids are not open to it. One teenager, I said, do you do any yoga or meditation? And she said, no, my mother does that. And I said, fine, we're just going to do some deep breathing. So I'll call it whatever we want, but yes, that's my slow way to introduce it. Makes a big difference.
It's really fantastic. Thank you so much, Charlotte. It's really great tips, great advice. I'm delighted to have next up on our schedule, Dr. Pamela Burnard. Dr. Pamela Burnard is Professor of Arts, Creativities, and Educations at the Faculty of Education, University of Cambridge, where she chairs the Arts and Creativities Research Group. She is co-editor of the journal Thinking, Skills, and Creativity, and is a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, the RSA, in the United Kingdom. Pamela?
Great. Hello. Hi, welcome from Cambridge. I'm an Australian and I've lived in the UK and worked at Cambridge University for 20 years. And I'm bringing tonight in this 5 minutes with you a sort of push against the legacy of the Renaissance and Romanticism associated with creativity in the arts, and the Enlightenment, where we saw creativity associated with science. And I'm going to be sort of looking at other discourses beyond divergent thinking and problem solving, and asking questions about which creativities are we educating for. I'm going to invite you to have a little rethink about the idea of why science and arts creativities matter for future making education. So let's trouble these discourses. Let's have a look at Bjork here, who has done a lot of work with David Attenborough, who is a natural historian. And in these pictures, you see an amazing artist who is also sort of wearing her own inventions, but also sort of bringing together the meeting of science in this molecular kind of outfit and reading a very thick book. So let's look look at Bjork, who has developed an album some years ago called Biophilia, which is also about the sound of nature and nature culture, the interaction of arts and musical artifacts. And she has an app which is incredible in terms of the interaction that she invites us. Well, what does her work exemplify? It brings into play diverse creativities, multiple creativities. So what is seen and done at the intersection of performing arts? I'm calling it performance creativity. Well, she also composes and songwrites. So I'm going to look at that and call it compositional creativity, because she's authoring new music, not just performing in her own voice, but she also designs and innovates, as you can see in these images. So we can call that form of authorship, design creativity. Plus, of course, she's a musician, but there is a lot of science. So there's disciplinary and transdisciplinary creativities playing out in her work. And so what does this tell us? Let's think now about music, because we've heard a lot, and thank you, Brandon, amazing acts of musicality, and also from Joanna with her incredible performance creativity, her voice being heard playing Vivaldi, her interpretation of Vivaldi. And Dana, she was looking at the creativity of drama, but also mentioned mathematics, as did Audrey, who mentioned computer science and acting, and Brooke, who actually said the word STEAM. Now, what happens when technology enhances creativity, when things change, when you open up to the digital world? And here you're seeing a couple of children working as inventors, creators, with a platform called Sonic Pi, and it's created and developed by Sam Aaron, who's here at the University of Cambridge in the UK, in partnership with Raspberry Pi Foundation. It's an open source software tool and platform, and it's fantastic for school children to learn programming, techno science practices where music meets science and meets with technology. And it's a fantastic way and here's tip number one, to actually sort of invite different kinds of ways of thinking about the making and creating and producing of science and arts, music and maths, and it actually helps to dismantle the sort of gendered and hegemonic regimes and discourses which tend to discriminate, dominate, and restrict our views of who can be creative, who can be musical, who are the scientists of the future, knowing that we actually have scientists who are women, and we can speak about that at a later date. I'm almost there. So here is a really interesting experiment where we asked children, young people, to show us their mathematical understanding and their arts understanding. And what do we see in such an image? This is one of 300 pictures like this, drawings like this, that we have actually analyzed in terms of the meeting, the transdisciplinarity of what do arts and maths teach together. What matters to the children, and actually the sort of experience that connects the sense of the symbolic self-referencing, the intimate knowledge that, this unending, hinted also by the hair, but drawn here, of a sort of self identity, a sort of an art self, a manga self, a South African self, a student self, a mathematician self, an art self, multiple identities here. And if we move on to think about what is a school, this is a very complex image, and I'm not apologizing because I think it is complex, but you can rotate around it to see there's transdisciplinary creativity, there's childhood creativity, curriculum, how do teachers author change in their classroom? How do we do everyday creativity? How do head teachers and leaders do leadership creativity? Or indeed, when cultures come and meet together, intercultural creativity. So these are authoring different kinds of modalities and practices, and authorships, a sort of multiplicity that changes the discourse and changes how we speak and how we unlock and sculpture new creativities for basically for change, to create change and to reform education in terms of future making, which is going to be in the hands of children who become adults very soon. I'm just going to stop sharing and say, I don't think you can see me because I haven't put my video on. There I am. So this is me saying my argument is about, can we think about multiple creativities and ask the question, which creativity are we educating for? And some of the tips and tricks, we might think there are no tricks, but the tips might involve asking ourselves questions, observing children very, with a deep hangout. Give them space, give them time, give them trust, give them a safe space to engage in their own, advancing their own ways of seeing and knowing and doing and becoming that transcends narrowly defined disciplines. And how to talk with and invite young children to tell us more and more and to teach us new ways to see and know and do things differently in a very different world that we all find ourselves in at this time. I'm going to stop there and say I look forward to your questions, and I'm so pleased and proud that you invited me tonight. I have books. If you just look at Pamela Burnard, Cambridge, you'll see the most recent one, which actually asks the questions, what science and arts creativities, why they matter, and what do they teach together?
That's really fantastic, Pamela. Thank you so much. And I can see you're surrounded by books, and I decided to surround myself with some technology to promote creativity in the meantime. But I'm just wondering, your focus is so exciting on many different kinds of creativities. And I wonder, as we are, many of us parents confronting the pandemic and have our kids, learning remotely, what would you say are the top priorities for the kinds of creativities we can promote right now? Yeah,
I think one of the things about this pandemic, I've seen home creativity. How do parents or carers, families, friends create a space for children to learn at home? And that space itself, that space for learning, that space becomes, can be not so segmented into time zones, but really led by children. It could be in the kitchen, working with science experiments in the kitchen, working with cooking and looking at how things come together in the kitchen, thinking about the real world phenomenon that actually are problems to be solved, but actually allowing the children to set the agenda, to read a book for the day, actually, but then to do something with that reading and do something that actually celebrates the making of authoring new ways of seeing and thinking, and dismantling the myth making that sort of there's creative children, and then there's children that are less creative. I am a great believer that we need to really recognize that the ubiquity of creativity, and that everyone, we're humans, and even non-humans like animals are creative in how they play and dance and engage and interact with us. So it's not just thinking creatively, it's doing and being and becoming. I have to say, this is one room in our house. You know, in England, this little house is very tiny, and downstairs it's filled with instruments, but it's also filled with other things to do with looking at the planets, and there's this meeting of science and music and arts downstairs. But I've got to pretend to look very serious and have books behind me so that you do believe I am a professor. So, you know, it's again the many faces that we wear. So allowing ourselves to find those faces. I saw it in Brooke, in Audrey, in Brandon, in Dana, in Joanna. You know, Jimi Hendrix, for example. Brandon was channeling Jimi Hendrix, but with a different voice. He had a performance creativity that made that piece his. Beautiful.
Really fantastic, beautiful, and thank you for leading us to encounter various kinds of creativities and to highlight the manifold of creativities that are available to all of us. Wonderful. Next up, we have a hands-on presentation from Emily, and we're very excited to have Emily join us up next.
All right, hello. Can everyone hear me? Yes. Okay, so my name is Emily Howard. I am a middle and upper school teacher at Greenfield School in Wilson, North Carolina, and I also own an art studio also in Wilson. And I'm just so happy to be a part of this conversation. And I'm just going to share a couple ideas for creative projects that can be done at home. As so many of us have moved virtual, we're constantly in search of ways that we can engage with kids. And so many different creatives like visual artists, authors, musicians have been creating content for people to try at home. And as a teacher, I'm always trying to consider what materials students are able to use, and access is always something that we try and take into consideration. So I try and create a mix of skill-based activities with art supplies, but there are also many different types of activities that you can do with materials that you can find at home. So you can do a found object color wheel, which is creating a giant color wheel on the floor with different bits and pieces of materials at home. You can also create famous pieces of artwork with materials that you can find at home. So this is actually an example my brother did. This is the girl with the pearl earring. And this is my brother's recreation. He actually has a mask on his head, which I thought was timely. And just in terms of being able to do projects at home, I would definitely recommend kind of keeping a little kit. Different things that you can include in that are oil pastels. You can have canvases just available for kids to mess around and explore with during bouts of boredom, markers, and then probably my favorite material, having just a watercolor set. And so watercolor is one that I just think people love across the board. It's a little bit lower stakes than other art materials. And this is a project that you can actually try with your kids at home. So if you have watercolors, just create little blobs of color, and you don't even have to tell them what they're going to do with it. Just kind of create these different little shapes, and then they can quickly create drawings out of their shapes. So this one has now become a bird, and you end up with all sorts of different things. And it's a really, really great exercise in creativity. And I think it's almost like a little artistic riff on the kind of how many uses for a paperclip experiment in divergent thinking. And I think it also kind of takes away that fear of having a blank piece of paper and feeling like you have to create something perfect right off the bat. It's just a really, really great example of an activity that you can do as many times as you'd like with different results every time. So I thank you so much for inviting me to this forum, and I just so appreciate being here. Thank you so much.
Emily, that is wonderful, and I really appreciate how you've transformed one of the original Torrance tests of creative thinking into the new watercolor blob test, or what would you call it?
Watercolor blob test sounds good to me.
Okay, all right, there you go. We're going to patent that then, since you got to have a good title for this. But I really love that idea, and I think it's a beautiful exercise as well.
Thank you
and
so
all
much.
the tips you have are really wonderful, great, great assets for our families and for our kids going forward. Really opening up a lot of avenues for them. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, I think that's the last of our formal presentations. We've had some amazing presentations from talented teams, experts, and our panelists have covered an amazing amount of ground. And so what we'd like to do now is engage all of our panelists in a little bit of discussion. One of the questions that's come up from our audience is about how safety figures into this. And you think about what's the relationship between creativity and feelings of safety. Is there anyone who'd like to jump in on that one?
I would jump in. There is research on the effects of psychological safety and creativity in different contexts, in schools and in the workplace too. So this is not just for children, but also for adults. And we are social beings by definition. So we are always going to have some level of apprehension about evaluation that is inherent in sharing ideas. So that's always going to be there, but the psychologically safe space is one that enables people to still contribute or still share in spite of this level of apprehension. So again, curiosity comes into play. If you give feedback with that curiosity, oh, have you wondered about? It's going to be very different than starting with leading with potential problems, which there are always problems with every idea until it's fully developed.
Yeah, that's brilliant. It brings to mind, there's a fun book, not necessarily about kids, but well, maybe they are kids, but Ed Catmull, who is the head of Disney Animation Studios and Pixar, which has become pretty well known, wrote a book called Creativity, Inc., in which he highlights the really critical importance of the freedom to fail. And one of the things that they do at Disney Animation Studios and Pixar is to give people some security of employment and know that they can explore and they can fail. They can't fail indefinitely, but I think that's it's a key message that is important for us to get across in work groups and in kids, is knowing that it's not going to be so bad if they make mistakes, if they fail. That they can still go forward.
It's interesting. It's a great question. And in one piece of research, a child said, I kept on having these collisions, and it was sort of, I'd never thought of making mistakes as a collision, but he said, I just got backed up and moved in a different direction. And it was this beautiful metaphor of sort of reinventing the experience of risk and failure as a collision that sparks another idea. And when you look at, great people that have created, been inventors, women and men, and that have created amazing, like the engineer or the architect of the Millennial Bridge in London. When they walked across the bridge in the year 2000, it started to sway, you'll remember. And he laughed as the media were biting at his heels saying, you failed. And he said, no, I have more failures than successes. That's why I'm so successful. And he fixed it, because it hadn't, it was a problem that still hadn't been solved, and there were other elements that he hadn't configured. So he had to rethink and revised and went back and look at that amazing bridge now that runs to the Tate Modern. So, I do think that children need, and teachers need safe space, and parents, to co-create safe spaces, learning environments that where it's full of trust, playfulness, and it's co-constructed. Because my rules are going to be different to your rules. It's inevitable. So how can we co-construct that together, and in that establish together what this needs to feel, what it can feel like. And I think play. We had an amazing presenter early with some lovely ideas about play and playfulness, and having contexts that are not about measuring and testing and trialing, but rather that freedom to be and to become.
Beautiful.
Thanks.
Others. Darya, I see you're unmuted. You must have something to say.
I was just thinking there's a lot of really great work by Sandra Russ. So she spent her entire career studying play in children and its effect on creativity, and the link between fantasy and creative thinking. So if anybody is interested, Sandra Russ, just Google, look her up. She's done some great work.
Really wonderful. Well, we have some other questions that have come in from the audience. One of them, the examples that we've seen so far in some of the vignettes have really focused on teens who've enjoyed quite a bit of privilege. And one of the questions that arises is how we can spark creativity and nurture that in children who come from less privileged backgrounds, resource poor, impoverished. What are the kinds of things that we can recommend in a less than resource rich environment?
I'm going to jump in. The kids I work with initially were from the inner city in LA, and they didn't have the experiences that the privileged kids I work with now have in terms of seeing the world and traveling. And so sometimes it was helpful to show them pictures to spark their imagination, to spark their creativity about what is possible. So maybe they didn't have that internal experience, but when they were exposed to possibilities, it would spark something inside. And that was helpful.
Another take on that, this is a very important question, and it is certainly something that hasn't been addressed nearly as much as it should be in our research. I think that privilege stays there even when we do some things, but there are some bright points. So for very young children, it doesn't take very much in the way of resources. It takes play, it takes time for unstructured play. If you have Amazon boxes, that's going to really do, and we all have. Using everyday objects in different ways, modeling and playing and engaging with them. And so if they keep telling you the same kind of use, you can switch them and model that flexibility of thinking. So for very young kids, it's less of an issue, although time is always there, and there are parents who work multiple jobs and do not have that time. So we have to acknowledge that privilege too. But there's another element of kind of bright element. Oftentimes kids who are very highly privileged from upper middle class families who are on track to go to Ivy League schools, we can imagine these kids. They are on very specific tracks where they have lots of activities, they have lots of things that is going to go on their CVs. They might not have time. That time does not exist there. And it becomes a big problem. In research that I have done with Dr. James Kaufman at University of Connecticut, we have examined how students of different social and ethnic backgrounds think of their own creativity. And actually, we have found some things that are counterintuitive, that they are things from less privileged backgrounds who actually can see their own creativity, while those for more privileged backgrounds don't always. And that element of self-efficacy, thinking you can do it, is important for engaging in creativity ultimately.
I'm wondering, how do we, promote that attitude in our homes and schools to try to identify that kind of creativity as the important outcome, and help our kids not be locked into a particular roadmap or agenda. I wonder what your thoughts are on that, panelists. What are things we can do as parents and educators?
Oh my gosh, I think of when kids are young, and depending on the school they're in, some teachers might say, well, we're going to make a duck and it's going to be yellow, and stay in the lines because that's fine motor skill development. And gosh, that doesn't really matter. Just the imagination is there, the creativity is there. Just open it up and let them. I love that scribble thing with the blob and then drawing from that. Just let them see what comes out. And there has to be a shift in focus for the older kids about the academic achievement, and have a little more, it's more important to be creative, to just let your mind go and brainstorm. And then from there, of course, the academics are important, but we're losing a lot with it without letting them just be free.
I agree entirely, Charlotte. This is about the intersection of inclusion, interculturality or transculturality, and diversity. And that's what we do as teachers and as communities. But it's in this authoring of getting young people and children to have a voice, their voice, and to voice, to connect with each other, to be together, and for teachers and parents to be listening deeply and giving them time and space for making, the materiality of making and doing together, so that from the ground up arises, an intercultural creativity, not something imposed, but something that comes from up from that community, in a sort of inclusive and intercultural way. And I think that's where the, creativity, if we think of it, it's not just about thinking, it's doing and it's being creative, and that potential to affect people's lives is so powerful. And it comes from, yes, people, lots of arts projects that have incredible outcomes on well-being, and connecting communities through arts practices, but also, transdisciplinary practices where they're making maths and science projects together outside in an installation that remains in their community. So there's this investment and ownership. I think we have to listen deeply and do some deep hangouts with, 21st century children at whatever age and stage, and communities, and it's not about bringing to a community something. It's about being in that community and growing the practices together. There's a lot of research on this that
Very
says
nice.
don't go in and be in a member of, in a trusted, safe space as part of that community. And incredible things happen, incredible creativities emerge.
I'm working with the kids every day, so I'm attending to their emotional needs, their concerns, their goals, and everyone's different with their creativity and imagination. But maybe I'll say, well, they have a big feeling. Do you have a dance for that, or play some drums? Could you do a little, give me a song, a happy song, give me a set, give me an angry song. whether they sing it to me or they play it on drums or they're dancing it, just give them the freedom to be creative in how they share themselves. And they appreciate that.
It's fantastic. Well, I know we've had a lot of emphasis talking about the kinds of things we can do away from the technology and to get divested from the screens, but are there some things that are on screen activities and programs and technology that you all would recommend to help enhance and promote creativity? What do you think about that? Since we know the technology is not going away.
I think there would be some parallels to thinking about, what sort of activities are kids doing off screen as well, that we apply those principles as well to on screen. So are kids engaging activities where, perhaps they don't have those opportunities to explore or to ask questions? Because I think that is one of the things that technology gives us, is this open source within parental guidance, of course, to follow those interests and to follow those curiosities. So thinking as a tool in that regards. And then in terms of games and activities, thinking about maybe those more open-ended, I think, places, struggling to think of examples, but, moving away from places where kids are just going to be hitting buttons and doing one thing and finding one right answer at a time, I think is what we'd be looking for.
Another idea with technology, or another way of looking at technology, is it is the best when it interacts with the real world. So there is a technology component, but it's not only in that box. As an example, there are lots of opportunities for activities for kids that are administered online, but interact with the real world. To give you a specific one, we are in time of a pandemic, and out of school activities that have been available previously were not available in the last, almost a year, right? My son is very interested in photography, and he took a class online in photography with students, children from all over the country, which he wouldn't have been able to do previously and in other ways. And one of the days that the class met, the teacher would explain things and give assignments, essentially. And for several days, children were then exploring and taking pictures in the real world. And another day that they would meet, they would give each other feedback and discuss ideas. So there's the technology component, there's interaction with the real world component. You have to go out and be able to interact with the world, and then you come and have that community that otherwise you might not have.
I love that. I also wanted to mention something that I teach a summer course at UCLA. It's called Personal Brain Management. And it's sort of a fun course, but we get a lot of UCLA undergrads and other people from around the world who can join in. But one of the teachings we have there is from Jaron Lanier, who has written some really great books. He comes from a technology background, but has recognized the pitfalls of technology. And one of my favorite books of his is called You Are Not a Gadget. And what he highlights in You Are Not a Gadget is that technology is not good or bad. It's a matter of what you do with it. And what he suggests as one key idea is to really be pioneering in what you do with the technology, to be engaged with the technology in a way that doesn't have the technology dictating to you what you do with it, but rather you putting yourself out there in authentic and realistic ways. So rather than, let's say, on a social media channel, following the template that Facebook or whatever other social media platform has given to you, but rather make up your own web page, put yourself out there. Never put online something that's just rehashing your experience, like a video that you just took yourself. Is always put online only things that took you 100 times longer to make than they take to watch. And a few guidelines like that I think highlight the importance of authorship and honesty, integrity, and putting yourself out there, not anonymously in your postings. These are some tips that Jaron Lanier has given us. Okay, very good.
Can I just jump in and add to that? May I add? Hello, can you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
What I mentioned before was Sonic Pi, which is an interesting way for children to actually learn algorithms, to learn to code using music. It really is extremely motivating for children that are primary school children and early secondary, but I've also seen older secondary students really kind of be intrigued with what can happen, because the coding is the music, the composition is the performance. It's live coding. You're creating something, the sound is coming out. It's not having to have grade 5 theory, 30 hours, 3,000 hours of practice. It's another way of engaging in a participatory culture that is, as having children learn to code means they're not just working with the outside of the machine, they're inside, engaging with another language, and the learner agency that comes from that in terms of the controlling the parameters and them seeing themselves as music creators, as music composers and performers, not having to play a kind of Western art music or have 5 years of lessons is I think really quite transformative. And I know there's a lot of literature that I was hearing tonight about video gaming having some negative effects. There's also literature and research happening that's saying that video games can also for children actually engage them in thinking about societies and changing their identities and seeing structures and making decisions and sort of engaging in a different modality to a children's picture book. So I think invite us to think there are negatives, but there are also positives around technologies and learning how to manage and be open to ways of thinking about children as they are growing through the 21st century with technology. It is with them, it is through them, it's part of them in a way that maybe it's not for us. I've seen very young children swipe windows thinking they can swipe as the screen, and that is, they're living in that's their world. So to use technology, to utilize it and develop new technologies and use them in schools in a creative way for creative teaching and teaching for creativity is really important.
That's really great. Now I see we have Barbara Rosati has joined us. Barbara, I wonder if you're able to come on. Well, there we go. There's
Hi.
Barbara.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you to the organizer, Dr. Bilder, and thank you to the panelists for the fantastic presentations. I'm in awe. I'm also a scientist. I live on Long Island. I'm a mom of a teenager, and I am interested in creativity because in my experience as a parent and as a teacher, I find that it is essential for children in order to find themselves and express themselves. And so it's an essential component of making a whole individual. So my question is the following: what if, for any of the panelists, I'm interested in the relationship between sleep and creativity. As we know, teenagers are often end up sleep deprived for a variety of reasons. So if anybody could tell me what is known about these two important things.
All I can say is that we have a set of data right now that's on my desktop that has been collected on sleep and creative thinking, but has not been analyzed yet. So,
right.
Great question, but I don't know.
Stay tuned.
All right, I will.
Maybe somebody else knows the literature.
I did read that there is a correlation between the amount and quality of the REM sleep and creativity. So kids often tend to be, and people in general often tend to be more creative as they wake up, because they've just had their fair share of, hopefully, of REM sleep. But I was wondering if anything more was known. Thank you.
And
I
also
can say
that,
one interesting.
sorry, go ahead,
Darya.
Bob.
No, that's good. Go ahead.
Well,
This is infinite loop of people on Zoom saying, no, you go ahead.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Yeah, so this is not really information, but I know that Paul Celi, another researcher, he has done some work on, so he had participants, right as they were falling asleep, he would wake them up and ask them to sort of generate creative ideas with, the question was, would their ideas be more creative during that time when, they were not quite asleep quite yet, but not awake. And the hypothesis is that, yes, that cognitive control part of the brain let go, we're relaxed, so that's just basically approximating that relaxed state of mind wandering, not being too focused.
That's absolutely a great observation, a great study. I actually have a funny story. My daughter was tricking me when she was little into reading her stories into bed, especially when she saw I was very tired. So I would doze off while reading the story to her. And at some point I was awakened by her chuckles, because apparently I kept reading and I put in like funny, unrelated words into the story. And she says, "Mommy, I really wish I wrote them down, because I would have made a really funny storybook." So
funny. My grandma used to do that. I still remember. It was great. Those were much more fun than the actual books.
Maybe you'll see me as an author next time.
Well, this is now we know the secret to Darya's creativity. It was grandma reading those special stories.
Yeah.
Do we have any, final quick thoughts from our panelists? Maybe we can, go in our original order. Darya, any final words you'd like to leave us with?
Final words, just have fun, just try to have fun. And I know it's hard right now, but just find that one little thing that you enjoy every day, whether it's a walk or a book or something. And same with kids. And we keep talking about, let kids be free, let them be bored. But I also know how hard that is, especially if you're a teacher and you have 30 kids in your classroom, and you can't just have them all be free and roaming around. And so yeah, it's hard. We all live in the real world, so we're just trying to find a balance.
Beautiful, beautiful. Natalie?
Yes, to go off of that, I think having fun is the most important part. And, when kids show that spark of interest or curiosity in something, do what you can to help promote it by helping them following up on it in any way they can.
That's fantastic. Zorana?
Having fun is a start, but in that working with creativity and realizing creativity beyond having an idea, you will have lots of other experiences, some pleasant, some unpleasant, some very frustrating, and acknowledging that will happen is going to help people manage it, and knowing that that's to be expected, it makes it more possible and people more willing to embark on it. I love the story from one of my favorite writers, Agatha Christie, who wrote close to 100 novels, and before each one, she would lie on the couch and stare at the wall for 2 days straight out of sheer desperation how difficult the process is. But she would get up and do it anyway. And I think that that's important to keep in mind, that there's really fun aspects to creativity, especially when we are free and coming up with ideas, but there are also going to be difficult times, but you can do it anyway.
Fantastic. Charlotte.
You know, I think it's important for parents to trust their intuition and to give themselves space also to connect with their creativity and just, you know, without judgment. And to remember that kids really, it's easier for them to be creative when they feel safe. And that's safe, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. So that's good to remember.
That's beautiful, beautiful. And Pamela B.
Thank you. I think for families, you know, we're still in lockdown here in England, to create together, to learn together, and to open up new paths together by asking two questions. What if? And then what else?
I love that. I love that. It's really beautiful. What a perfect closing. And to all of our panelists, we're so grateful to get your insights and to hear the brilliant science and other works that you've been engaged in. But most, I'd like to thank our fearless leader and organizer, Pamela Hurst de la Pietra, for bringing this all together. Pamela, it's back to you.
Thank you so much, Bob, Zorana, Darya, Charlotte, Pamela, Andrea, Emily, and Joanna, and our creative teenagers, Brandon, Brooke, Audrey, and Dana, for sharing your experience, expertise, and ideas with us. Thanks to all of you who joined us today. We hope that today's discussion will inspire you and your family to flex your creative muscles. To continue learning about this topic, be sure to visit our website, where we'll post additional insights in the coming days. We'll also post a video of today's webinar on our YouTube channel, which we encourage all of you to subscribe to and share with your fellow parents, teachers, clinicians, researchers, and friends. For more from Children and Screens, please follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and our account shown on the screen. Our conversation addressing children's well-being and digital media will continue throughout the winter and spring. On Wednesday, December 16th, our experts will talk about how to make the most of being home for the holidays. Stay tuned for more information about this and other events that are happening in 2021. When you leave the workshop, you'll see a link to a short survey. Please click on the link and let us know what you thought of the webinar. Thanks again, and everyone be safe and well.